Hello, fifth grade. We are on Domain 4, Adventures of Don Quixote, and we are on Lesson 1, The Life of a Knight. Our objectives for this lesson are to identify and explain important aspects of a knight's life during the Middle Ages and how they influenced Cervantes' Adventures of Don Quixote. You're going to also identify the beginning stages of the story's plot structure, meaning setting, main character in the story, and make inferences regarding a character's personality. Some key vocabulary. According to is what means as said or written by a person or group. A quote is to repeat the exact words someone else used. And transition words are words or a phrase used to move from one event to another. So this unit we are starting today is called The Adventures of Don Quixote. The story of Don Quixote was originally written in the early 1600s by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, which is he's usually referred to as Cervantes, and he lived in Spain. A very popular genre of books read and enjoyed by many people during this period recounted fantastic adventures, brave deeds, and fanciful romances of various fictitious knights. Cervantes wrote Don Quixote to make fun of or parody this genre of books, which was inspired by true accounts of the exploits and exploration of knights or soldiers who actually lived during the Middle Ages. The label Middle Ages is one given by historians to the 1,000-year period approximately from 500 CE to 1500 CE. This means that the Middle Ages took place about 100 years before Cervantes wrote Don Quixote. So we're going to actually read a portion of a chapter from grade 4 unit on the Middle Ages, and it's entitled Gloomy Castles and Jousting Knights. This is just to review what knights are and some information about them. I'm going to turn my video off so you guys can see what I see. Perfect. So, Chapter 3, Gloomy Castles and Jousting Knights. Whether rich or poor, young men in the Middle Ages learned how to use a weapon of some kind. Rivalries between nobles, wars with other nations, and even violence between neighbors required that they be able to fight. When a lord needed to raise an army, he turned to those he governed. In the Middle Ages, ordinary foot soldiers were trained to fight with an axe and a long spear called a pike. Others were trained to be skillful archers and crossbowmen. Some foot soldiers might have worn chainmail, an early form of metal armor, but most had padded coats and carried daggers. However, the most esteemed soldiers were knights. Knights were soldiers who fought on horseback and sometimes on foot for their lord. If you wanted to be a knight, you had to be able to afford horses and armor. You also had to find someone willing to train you, because it was very expensive to become a knight. These mounted warriors were usually sons of wealthy, influential members of society. Being a knight was one way of making a fortune. If you were involved in successful battles and wars, you might receive money or land as payment for your services. Sometimes a king might reward you with a title. Having a title usually meant that you were an influential member of society. Knights also made money by looting and by holding certain people for ransom. If you were a knight. Your training to become a knight begins at a young age. You leave home to live with a family, friend, or relative who has agreed to train you. In the first several years of your training, you help to dress and to serve the Lord. You are known as a page. During these early years as an aspiring knight, you probably learned to use a sword, to ride a horse, and to wield a lance, or a long wooden pole with a metal tip. Later, when you were ready to learn more challenging skills, you became a squire. Although you were still a servant as a squire, you are now responsible for grooming and saddling the Lord's horses. You are also responsible for cleaning and polishing his armor. You learn how to fight while riding a horse. You learn to use other weapons, including a heavier lance. This part of your training lasts for several years. If you're a successful squire, you might be knighted by the Lord. In what is called the dubbing ceremony, the Lord taps you on the shoulder with the flat part of his sword. Then a priest might bless you with prayer. The way of the knight. In France in the 1100s and 1200s, certain expectations about how knights should behave in society were developed. The term chivalry, which refers to a warrior, horseman, or knight, became the term used to describe these expectations. These ideas of chivalry spread to other European countries. Knights were expected to serve their lord. They were required to honor and protect the church and weaker members of society. They were also expected to treat other knights captured in battle as honored guests until a ransom was received. Sometimes it took months before a captured knight's family paid up. Once payment was received, the captured knight was free to go home. Charge. Knights could prove their strength and abilities by taking part in jousting matches. Jousting matches were mock or pretend battles between two or more knights. Knights rode horses, wore full armor, and carried lances. Those who took part in jousts did so to gain respect and possibly a generous prize. For the privileged, attending the jousting matches was considered to be a day of excitement and entertainment. It was very much like watching a football or baseball game today. When the joust began, the knights charged at each other. With the aid of a lance, each knight attempted to knock his opponent off his horse. So that was just a little brief review of what a knight's life looks like. So it'll help us figure out a little bit more about Don Quixote as we get through that story. So why was there a need for knights and castles in the Middle Ages? Well, there were wars between different countries, and these were the people that fought. The process of becoming a knight. So you had to come from a wealthy family. Then you had to find someone to train you. You became a page. Then you served the Lord as the page. Then you were promoted to a squire, who then, took care of more things around, grooming the horses and was given more training. And if you managed to do all of this training and took care of the Lord, eventually you would be dubbed a knight. So a knight's responsibility is to serve their lord, protect the church, and weak members of society, and they have to be brave enough to fight battles and have to follow the code of chivalry. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start reading the Adventures of Don Quixote. This is one of my favorite books, so I'm very excited to be able to read this. Now, in this unit, there's going to be some times where I'm going to be reading. There's going to be some times where you will be independently reading, and I've noted that on the side. So this one, for today, we're going to actually read. I'm going to read it out loud. One, A Knight in Armor. Once there was a man who went crazy from too much reading. He only read books about knighthood. That was the problem. Those books told about the adventures of knights in armor, their fantastic encounters with dragons, monsters, giants, wizards, and even other knights. There was also talk of love, because each knight had a lady of his dreams. Soon the man came to believe that all those fantastic tales were true. One day he decided to become a knight, for he wanted to right all that was wrong in the world and punish evil. Alone in his room, he practiced jousting. Wham, wham, wham! Like the heroes in his books, he always won. All this happened in a little village in a province called La Mancha, in the heart of Spain. The man had lived in the same place all his life, as his parents and grandparents had before him. He was about 50, tall and thin, and he had a small beard. No one would ever expect anything bad from him, or think anything wrong about him, for he was an honorable man, a perfect gentleman. Two other people lived in his home. They were his pretty, cheerful, innocent niece, about 20, and his plump housekeeper, about 40, who was a good, friendly soul with strong opinions about everything. A boy did chores around the house. It is not clear what the gentleman's real name was. Some think it was Alonso Quixano, but the last name could have been Quixada, Quixana. He came from a respectable family. That's why he was called Don Alonso. He had inherited a little land, but very little else. When he became ill, he sold many acres of good farmland to buy more of his favorite books. One day he began the actual preparations to become a knight. Somewhere in the house there was an old suit of armor that had belonged to his great-grandfather. He cleaned it and polished it and fixed it up the best he could. The helmet was in such bad shape that it had to be tied together. A horse he already had, old and bony, not much of a horse, but a mount nonetheless. He spent 4 whole days thinking of a good name for his horse. It would be Rocinante. And what a good name it was. Rocin is a Spanish word that means nag or workhorse, and antes means before. To most people, the name means this was once a horse, but to Don Alonso, it meant a steed above and beyond all the other horses in the world. His own name, Don Alonso, didn't seem good enough for the knight. He changed it to Don Quixote and added de la Mancha so everyone would know where he came from. Don Quixote de la Mancha. What a fine sounding name for a knight. But he still needed a lady to dream about, a lady to receive homage from his defeated enemies. No one knew he was in love, but he was, so secretly. It seems that even the lady herself didn't know he liked her. She was a farm girl from nearby El Toboso, and was plain, rough, ordinary. Her name was Aldonza Lorenzo. He had seen her only once in his life. Without her knowledge, Don Quixote pronounced her his lady, and called her Dulcinea de Toboso. Her name, like the others, was well chosen. It comes from the Spanish word dulce, which means sweet. Don Quixote was very pleased with his preparations. Okay, so what's the setting of this story of Don Quixote? It's actually a story set in Spain. It mentions that he's from La Mancha. Who are the two main human characters and the one animal character introduced in Chapter 1, and what role does each one play? Well, we've learned about Don Alonso, or Don Quixote. He's the main character. He also talks about Dulcinea de Toboso, which is his lady. And then Rocinante is Don Quixote's horse. And what are some character traits of Don Quixote that are revealed? Well, he's very obsessed with this fantasy world. He's very idealistic, so he's a little crazy because he loves to read so much. He's so immersed into that culture that he wants to become that. So the word I would use is eccentric to describe him, and it means to have a strange or peculiar behavior that differs from others. So the way he's acting when it comes to being a knight is very different than what others would perceive him to do. So our word work for today is honorable. No one would have ever expected anything bad from him or think anything wrong about him, for he was an honorable man, a perfect gentleman. So honorable means deserving of respect, and it's an adjective. So your assessments tip for today is you're going to read several sentences. If the sentence is about someone doing something honorable, you're going to actually select honorable. But if someone doing something not so honorable, you're going to select not honorable. And we will see everyone in our next lesson.